How Star Trek Voyager Seasons 4 to 7 changed Borg lore forever. Star Trek Voyager Season 4 used the Borg to insult the Kazon and inadvertently ended up establishing an interesting Borg fact in the process. The Borg are one of the most popular and well-known villains in the Star Trek timeline, and have gone through some extensive changes since they were first introduced in Star Trek: The Next Generation. While recent series like Star Trek, Picard have provided some of the biggest shifts the Borg have ever experienced, it was Voyager that originally defined much of their lore and backstory after the franchise had already established them. By contrast, the Kazon continue to be one of the most hated races Star Trek has ever created. First introduced as the primary antagonists of Voyager's first 2 seasons, the Kazon were so universally disliked that they were written off the show at the end of Season 2 and have only made sporadic appearances in modern Star Trek TV shows. Later Voyager seasons found creative ways to reference and insult the Kazon, and one of these occurred in Season 4, Episode 12, Mortal Coil. Star Trek Voyager Season 4, making fun of the Kazon, inadvertently established an important Borg fact in Mortal Coil. When talking to Neelix, Ethan Phillips, about the Kazon, 7 of 9, Jerry Ryan, stated that the Borg had previously deemed the species unworthy of assimilation because their biological and technological distinctiveness was unremarkable. Upon first glance, this line may seem like a throwaway or an inside joke between Voyager's creative team about how hated the Kazon were during the show's first 2 seasons. While it was likely intended that way, the line ended up establishing a Borg trait that had not been previously shown. In TNG and Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the Borg were not shown to discriminate among the species they assimilated. Their most terrifying trait was their relentless drive to assimilate every species they came across in pursuit of perfection. However, one 7 of 9 line showed that the Borg did in fact have standards when it came to incorporating others into their collective. 7 went on to say, "Why assimilate a species that would detract from perfection? Not only is this line a pretty pointed dig at the Kazon, but it also adds nuance to the Borg as a whole." Why Star Trek Voyager expanded Borg lore so significantly in Seasons 4 to 7 more than any other Star Trek show or movie, Voyager was primed to expand the Borg from the beginning. TNG had established that the Delta Quadrant was where the Borg originated, meaning that Voyager's setting guaranteed at least one Borg-related storyline. Along with this, the introduction of 7 of 9 in Season 4 allowed Voyager to explore the Borg in a more intense and personal way than TNG ever did, even with characters like Captain Picard, Patrick Stewart, or Hugh, Jonathan Del Arco. However, there was one more important reason Voyager focused so heavily on the Borg. Star Trek First Contact premiered during Voyager's release, and its debut coincided closely with Voyager's introduction of the Borg. This was no accident, as demonstrated by the multiple references to things First Contact established about the Borg in Voyager Season 4. Along with this, the introduction of the Borg Queen, Alice Krige, likely reignited interest in the species and resulted in viewers having more questions about them than ever. Since DS9, the only other Star Trek series at the time, was focused on the Dominion War, there was no better place to explore those questions than in Star Trek Voyager. The Borg are one of the most iconic and feared adversaries in the Star Trek universe, embodying the ultimate collective consciousness and the loss of individuality. When Star Trek The Next Generation (TNG) introduced the Borg in the late 1980s, they represented an impersonal, monolithic threat that assimilated entire civilizations without mercy. Yet, as Star Trek Voyager continued into its later seasons 4 to 7, the Borg underwent a radical evolution that forever changed their lore, adding new dimensions to their once static depiction. Before Voyager, the Borg were characterized by their singular drive to assimilate all forms of life and technology, blending them into their collective hive mind. The Borg Queen, introduced in Star Trek First Contact, 1996, added some complexity, giving the collective a distinct leader, though her presence didn't fully break from the Borg's overriding sense of unity. However, starting in Season 4 of Voyager, the show began to peel back the layers of Borg society, revealing complexities and vulnerabilities that shifted our understanding of this species forever. 7 of 9, the human face of the Borg. The introduction of 7 of 9, played by Jerry Ryan in Voyager's 4th season, was perhaps the most significant change to Borg lore. A former drone separated from the collective, 7 of 9 became the show's symbol for the possibility of reclaiming one's individuality after assimilation. Prior to this, the Borg were seen as an almost irreversible fate. Once assimilated, there was no coming back. Seven's struggle to rediscover her humanity while retaining her Borg enhancements and knowledge created a powerful narrative that added depth to the Borg story. Through Seven, Voyager explored how Borg assimilation affected individuals on a personal level. Her journey highlighted the trauma, psychological scars, and loss of identity that came with being part of the collective. Her gradual rehumanization offered viewers a chance to see the emotional cost of Borg existence, something that TNG only lightly touched upon with characters like Captain Jean-Luc Picard after his assimilation as Locutus. While Picard's experiences showed that individuals could be freed from the collective, Seven's prolonged struggle revealed just how difficult and complex that process could be. The Borg as a fragile empire, while TNG often portrayed the Borg as an unstoppable force of nature, Voyager began to show cracks in the collective's armor. Through encounters in seasons 4 through 7, it became apparent that the Borg were not an invincible monolith, but rather an empire with internal vulnerabilities and weaknesses. The idea of Unimatrix Zero, a virtual reality safe haven for rebellious drones introduced in the 6th season, showed that even within the collective, individuality could not be entirely erased. The presence of resistance movements within the collective and the existence of drones capable of independent thought pointed to a fundamental fragility in the Borg's apparent unity. This undermined the perception of the Borg as an unchangeable, inevitable force. It introduced the idea that, under the right circumstances, the Borg's perfect control could be challenged. The Borg Queen and the nature of control. The Borg Queen, who had first appeared in First Contact, became a recurring character in Voyager. The Queen's role was expanded beyond being merely a figurehead, as the series explored her complex relationship with the collective and with individual drones like 7 of 9. The Queen's desire to reassimilate Seven was not simply about regaining a lost drone, but was a reflection of her need to maintain control over the collective's individuality. This dynamic created a more nuanced view of the Queen, not as a simple villain, but as a leader trying to manage the vast, complex society that was the Borg. Moreover, Voyager raised questions about the nature of the Queen herself. Was she a single entity, or was she a manifestation of the collective's will? Could she be replaced or destroyed? The multiple iterations of the Borg Queen that appeared in the show hinted at the idea that she was more of an avatar for the collective rather than a true individual. This blurred the lines between individuality and collective identity within the Borg, adding more layers to their lore. Species 8472 and the Borg's mortality in Season 4, Voyager introduced Species 8472, an alien race from fluidic space that posed a threat to the Borg unlike any they had encountered before. Their immunity to assimilation and biological superiority shook the Borg's foundations, forcing them to ally with Voyager's crew in a rare act of desperation. This storyline exposed a critical vulnerability in the Borg and challenged the belief that they were an unbeatable force. It showed that even the Borg had limits and could be pushed to the brink of collapse by a superior enemy. This introduction of a foe that could not only resist assimilation, but actively devastate the Borg's forces, reinforced the idea that the collective was not invincible. It shattered the image of the Borg as an inevitable, all-consuming threat, replacing it with the notion that even the Borg could face existential challenges beyond their control.